Shalom Aleichem. Welcome everybody who are watching us now on this recording, as well as those who are live on Skype. And Baruch Hashem, we have a live audience. So here we go. We are in chapter 45 of Genesis, Parshat VaYigash. And we're going to deal, ultimately, one of the main themes for tonight are the secrets, the truths behind our ability to be redeemed. Yes, Yosef conveyed to his brothers at the very beginning of this long 210-year exile in Egypt what it is that kept the Jews, or will keep the Jews Jewish, will keep Israel in, marching orders in order to leave Egypt and eventually go up to the land of Israel, which I think is so relevant, especially today, because we are still in an exile. Maybe not the Egyptian exile, but for sure the Roman exile, any exile. What they did, what he conveyed to them to do, is what we should do in order to ensure and make sure that we are to be redeemed. Okay, so let us begin in chapter 45, verse 3. It says, "And Yosef said to his brothers, I am Yosef. Is my father still alive?" Okay, now he's introducing himself. He's letting them know, guess what? I'm Yosef. For all the times, right, the last couple chapters, they had no idea that this was Yosef. They knew it was the viceroy, the second in command to Pharaoh, giving them a really hard time, accusing them of being spies, taking them hostage, perhaps even slaves. Now he reveals that he is Yosef. The question here that the Educator is bothered by or wants to address is the fact that he says, is my father still alive? Now, why should that bother us, the reader? Because all you have to do is go back to chapter 43. And it says in 43, verse 27 and 28, he inquired after their welfare, and he said to them, is your elderly father, whom you mentioned well, is he still alive? And you know they answered him. And they said, your servant, our father, is well. He is still alive. And they bowed and prostrated themselves. So what's going on here? In our verse in chapter 45, Ha'od Avichai is the question that he asks. Well, guess what? They already told him that he's alive. Ha'odenu Chai, right? Our father is still alive. Well, that was the question. Odenu Chai, and they answered, yes, he's still alive. So why are they asking, why is Yosef then asking a second time, is our father still alive? And he doesn't say, I kind of gave it away because he doesn't say our father. He says, is my father still alive? What's the difference? What if he asks, is my father still alive, or is our father still alive? Let's find out. So let's go to the Educator once again and start off. Ha'od Avichai, is my father still alive? So the Educator says, even though they already said that he's alive, if you read the narrative according to the words of Yehuda, for sure he's alive. Nevertheless, what was Yosef thinking? We are going to enter the mind of Yosef. Why did he ask this question a second time? Is my father still alive? Ulai Omar Cain, perhaps he said this in order to what? Kadeshi Yikamru Rachamav al Hazakein Velo Yigrum Lo Misa. Yosef was thinking maybe Yehuda said this in order to arouse an emotion within Yosef, to have Rachmanu, to have some mercy on Binyamin and not kill Binyamin. Now, are you guys following what's going on here? We're going into Yosef's mind that perhaps Yosef was thinking that what was the purpose and reason for Yehuda to say, yes, he's still alive, because as long as he's still alive, and there is, as we're going to see, he specifically says there's a strong connection between the father who's still alive and his son Binyamin, who's now going to be brought down to Egypt and perhaps even taken as a slave, maybe even killed, who knows? So Yosef's thinking maybe he did that as a manipulation to trick me. Just as an example, if you want to go, well, he says, Ki benafsho kishura benafsho, because his soul, Binyamin's soul, is very well connected to his father's soul, and God forbid he should be killed. Look as an example in Genesis chapter 43, verse 30. And Joseph hastened, for his mercy was stirred towards his brother. See, in the Hebrew, Ki nichmaru rachamav elochav, we see that already back then that right after the statement was made he was still alive, he had some mercy and some rachmanut. Look in 44 verse 30, a chapter later. And now, when I come to your servant, my father, and the boy is not with us, since his soul is attached to his boy's soul. V'nafshu kishura benafsho. So we see there was a comment already, there's a strong connection between Binyamin and Yaakov, and so Yosef thought perhaps he only said that so I should have rachmanut and not kill Binyamin. But I don't know the truth, is he still alive or not? Perhaps he was manipulating me. Okay. Al kain she'ilam shenis. That's why he asked him a second time. Ha'od avichai. Is my father still alive? Now, ulavavam lo kain yidameh. The brothers could not even imagine such a thing. That what? What were they thinking instead? V'chashu shelo niskaven l'shoel imhu chai olo. They were thinking that Yosef was not asking in truth that he wanted to know if their father was still alive or not. Ella shebo lahazkir avonam. Sorry, this is already now. We're in the present tense in our chapter 45, verse 3, that he was trying to remind them of their sin. The sin of what we call Mechirat Yosef, Mechiras Yosef, the sale of Yosef. We're still carrying this around till this very day. In fact, the Kliyakar explains that Sinas Chinam, the true, what do you call it, causeless hatred, actually came into the world at this time as well. Not just on Tisha B'Av, at the time of the spies, okay, but here. This is a tragedy for the Jewish people. And he was perhaps reminding them of their sin. And now we understand, that's why it says, Od Avichai, is my father still alive? That what he says, Avi, Lomar Sha'avihu, it's my father. What is he saying? V'lo Avichem. He's not your father. Now, it doesn't mean you're not brothers and you didn't all come from his seed. But what it means is, Kilo chastam al tzaro. You had no pity. You had no concern about the pain of your father. Ki ilu enu avichem, as if he's not your father. Yes, it's like he's for them. They took it harshly when he says, "Is my father still alive?" Because we didn't really treat him properly as a father. That's not what you do to a father to cause him such pain. Al kenif holu. That's why they were in shock. They were in such a state of not knowing what to say, and they couldn't respond. They were mamish dead silent, so to speak. They had no idea how to respond to such a statement. Is my father still alive? Just so you can see it, just go back to the whole verse, 45 verse 3. Right? And Yosef said to his brothers, I am Yosef. He says, is my father still alive? And what does the rest of the verse say? But his brothers could not answer him because they were startled. Right? They were in absolute confusion before him, mipanav, in front of him. Okay, let's go on with the Kliyakar. The second paragraph on the first page. V'otam acher al b'holazu. There's another reason for this confusion or this confoundment, or let's call it shock. Lefisha Amar, because he said, Ani Yosef. Now in our verse, he doesn't say, Achichem, your brother. Later on, and not much later, I think it's the next verse, we'll see shortly, he says, I am Yosef, your brother. But in our verse, he doesn't say, I'm your brother. He just says, I'm Yosef. What's the big deal? I mean, after 22 years, they sold him off, that you would expect him to say, I'm Yosef, your brother? he says, I'm Yosef. It's only afterwards he says, I'm Yosef, your brother. What's the difference? Al kein nivhala nichpazu. This is what really startled them. The very fact that he did not say, I'm your brother. Sham ra'oda achazatam. Right there and then, they were, fear seized them and overtook them. Ki amru, because you know what they said to themselves? Pen yavakesh liyot oyev umitnakem. Perhaps he is going to be, he's seeking out to be our enemy, our arch enemy, and take vengeance, to be a venger on take vengeance on what had happened. V'hasiu es atzmo min achava. That the word, I think the word is to be removed. The word literally, hisia, means to move on, but he moved on from brotherly love. He removed himself from this aspect of brotherly love. Remember the original question. Why doesn't he introduce himself as Yosef, your brother? That's not included. So they, of course, would think, perhaps, that he's seeking out to be their enemy, and he removed himself. You know what happens in human psychology? What you do, what you're guilty of, what people are guilty of, they pin on other people. And this is exactly what they were guilty of, removing themselves from brotherly love because they wanted to kill him. Let's see what the Kli Yakar has to say. Kasher asu heimalo. This is exactly what they did to him, so they figure this must be what he's tried to do to them. I'll read it again. Kasher asu heimalo. Shehisiu es atzmam min achava. They removed themselves from this brotherly love, like Rashi explains in chapter 37, verse 17. This is when Yosef went down to find them. Remember, Yaakov sent him, go check on your brothers. And he ran into a man. The man said, they have traveled away from here. Now, in the English, I beg you, learn Hebrew. Just take the risk. Just sink your teeth in a little bit, right? Learn a little bit of Hebrew. In Hebrew it says, Nasu mizeh, v'yomer ish nasu mizeh. They traveled from here. But the same word is we're talking about that they removed themselves from this. That's a better way to translate it, right? Nasu mizeh, they traveled away from this. Look what Rashi says, they traveled away from here. They removed themselves from brotherhood. And it says they sought to kill him. They were looking for legal arguments in order to, as like a court would do, seek a death penalty for him. Okay? So, the rest of the verse, just to read it. So, he said, I overheard them say, let's go to Dothan. So Yosef went after his brothers and found them in this place called Dothan. Fine. So, as the Kli Yakar says, regarding this verse, Nasu mizeh, akin amar lehem shenis. This is why he then says in verse 4. Remember, in verse 3 he only introduced himself as Ani Yosef, but in verse 4 he says Ani Yosef achichem, who is your brother. But wait, once you introduce yourself as Yosef, your brother, you would think that would be a loving thing, like a let's say, you have nothing to fear because I'm your brother. Wait till you hear the rest of the verse. Asher mechartem osi Mitzrayma, who you sold me to Egypt. Now that's like putting, like adding insult to injury. Although we started off by saying, Achichem, I'm Yosef, your brother, but the end of the latter part of the verse does not sound very nice. It sounds like it's rebuke, right? Remember me, your brother, you sold to Egypt? Now, we're going to learn a little bit about Egypt. And that's going to bring us into the secrets that I mentioned earlier about how to get redeemed. Even though, this is what Yosef is conveying to them. You know, I get it, you sold me. But why to Egypt? Right? The least you could have done was sold me to the Swiss Alps, right? Or to the Riviera, right? Or somewhere, you know, a little bit more decent. You know, you could have sold me somewhere else that is not so sexually impure and immoral. She'ena shetufi zima kochach. Some place that is not so decrepit. Because this is what these words mean. Shetufei zima means they were sexually perverse. You sold me to like the worst place in the world when it comes to sexual perversion. And nevertheless, mikol makom achichem ani, I am your brother. And then the verse continues, Va'al yichar be'einechem ki machartem oti hema, right? As the verse had continued to say. Verse 5, right? Genesis 45, 5. But now do not be sad, and let it not trouble that you sold me here. Okay, don't be angry at yourselves that you sold me here. He's assuring them that everything was by the hand of God. That trust me, it wasn't nice, it wasn't right, but in the end, you're going to see what happened. See, don't be so upset with yourself. You sold me to Egypt specifically. Because ultimately it was God that sent me here in order to preserve your life, in order to keep you guys alive. As we all well know, that he was able to interpret the dreams, and eventually he became, like, let's say, an earpiece to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh liked his interpretation, and unfortunately it wasn't such a good, interpretation, but let's say there were 7 years of famine, 7 years of good and plenty, and so he made this suggestion, the other way around, that during the 7 years of plenty, they should save up for the 7 years of famine that would follow. And that was a great idea, okay? And that's what kept them alive, because after 2 years of, even in Eretz Yisrael, Eretz Canaan, there was, if the famine hit, took its effect, and they had to come down looking for food. So ultimately, it was Yosef's, I'm going to say, it's really the brothers that sold him to Egypt that ultimately brought about their own salvation, because he was able to feed them. However, the super metaphysical understanding, we haven't yet arrived. Wait till you hear this. Ki roe ani. This is how I see it. Meaning, this is in Yosef's mind. How Yosef sees the whole sequence of events. Shenit galgel hadavar. The word nitgalgel, like the way that circumstances presented themselves, one thing led to another, to another, to another. Shabati ben shetufei zema, that I ended up here in Egypt, that is such a decrepit and perverse place. V'korali mikra be'eshes potifar, and I ended up being harassed, I almost raped, right? Sexually harassed by Mrs. Potiphar. But guess what I did? Shekabashti es yitzri. But I was able to control my inclination. V'ayidei zeh. Now through my abilities of controlling my evil inclination and not coming into this situation, Zechiti liot roi Yisrael. I ended up being a leader, a shepherd amongst the Jewish people, amongst Israel. Zanu mefarnes, providing food and other welfare, money. Kamo shene'emar. Now this is a very interesting verse. This we find later by the blessings that Yaakov is giving his children, and specifically the bracha that was given to Yosef. You'll find this in Genesis 49:24. It says, but his bow was strongly established. V'teshev be'etan kashto. It's crazy. And the later part of the verse is Misham roeh even Yisrael. So I want to just concentrate on this verse a little bit. This is the blessing that Yaakov is giving to Yosef specifically. And he's saying, but his bow was strongly established. Now this was going, and what does that mean? So basically it's like this. I don't know how much of this I want to read, I just want to give over the idea. That it says in Proverbs 29:3, but he who keeps company with harlots wastes his riches. Okay, very important verse. So if you are sexually perverse, you will become poor. And this verse, that his bow Bow is something that the arrows shoot out from. I want you to use your imagination. Something in which the arrows shoot out from. If you're holding your bow tightly and you're not allowing your urges to shoot these arrows, so then this is part of the blessing that Yosef was being praised by Yaakov for not involving himself with sexual immorality. There's another verse. It's in Proverbs 6:26. It says, "For on account of a harlot, a man is brought to a loaf of bread," which means that he is not able to find a loaf of bread. He becomes so poor that he will not even be able to afford a loaf of bread. But the idea in Hebrew says he won't even find a loaf of bread. So I don't know if he has money or not, but he will feel the impoverished. Imagine not being able to find even a loaf of bread. Just on number 10, where it says Talmud Bavli Sota 4b, the idea here is that anyone who engaged in sexual intercourse with a harlot will eventually be reduced to poverty and beg people for a loaf of bread. That's the bottom line of everything I didn't read to you. So we have to see the opposite. The opposite means that if you're able to be like Yosef and hold yourself back, so then you'll be enriched. Like we just said, if you give in to your evil inclination, sexually deprived, impoverished, so to speak, you're not leading a moral life, it will lead you to poverty. Or on the other hand, that if you're able to control yourself, it should lead you in the opposite direction. Baruch Hashem, Bezrat Hashem, as a zan or mefarnes, and at least satisfied with what you have. Now there's another point, because the end of the verse says, Misham roe Evan Yisrael, he becomes an Evan, a stone, a rock. Now just to keep in mind that the word Evan, a rock, is actually a combination of two words, Av and Ben. Okay, so the rabbis agreed to this in Gemara Sota. So I want to take you to Gemara Sota for a second in 4b. Okay, we actually read that already. However, there's a little bit, it says like this, Kol haba alei shasish. So the Gemara actually says, if anybody comes and has sexual relations with a married woman, obviously not his wife, someone else's wife, L'sof mevakesh kikar lechem, in the end, he will seek out bread, a loaf of bread, ve'eno moitze, and he will not find. So what is his message to his brothers? Vilulo hayiti bein shetufei zima. If I had not been brought down to Egypt, that is so perverse, ulai haya nivchar ish acher, perhaps a different person would have been chosen, letikun shnei harav, in order to fix or take care of those lean years, the years of famine. But after the fact that it already occurred to me that all these happenstances happened to me, that you sold me to such a perverse place, such as Egypt, nobody else would have been able to fix the situation except for me. Therefore, ultimately, the sale which brought me down to Egypt, Garmali, that's what actually caused me. This is how it all came about, that I was a preserver of life, that I was able to keep you guys alive, because Hashem set me before you. You understand that in our own lives, we could only imagine when we think that bad things happen, when things that are not going so smooth and not so right, or not as expected. Guess what? It's all in the hands of Hashem, and something good will come out of it. Hashem always creates the antidote before the makkah. He always creates the solution before the problem, and there's always something good. There's ultimately something good for us and for Am Yisrael that's going to come out of it. Okay? And we should keep that in mind. And that's one of the lessons that Yosef taught us. The next paragraph, Chazal teach us in Bereshit Rabbah. Now I'm going to actually read it to you. It's only 3 lines. It's 93:11. Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah said, "Woe lanu miyom adin, woe is to us for the day of judgment. Oy lanu miyom hatochecha, woe to us for the great day of rebuke. Uma Yosef at Tzaddik, what do we know about Yosef, the righteous at Tzaddik, who is only basar v'dam? He's only a human being. Kishemokiach es achav, when he gives rebuke, and he had given rebuke to his brothers, lo yachlu lamod b'tochechto, they were not able to stand, they had nothing to answer to his rebuke." What is rebuke anyway? It's proof that you could do something a better way. Okay? HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Shu Dayan Ubaldin, when we think about the Holy One, blessed be He, who is the ultimate judge, and the Baldin, He's going to be the prosecutor. The Yoshev al Kisei Din, and He's sitting on His throne of judgment. V'dam kol echad ve'echad, and He's judging each and every one of us. Alachas kama v'kama, how much more so? She'ein kol basar v'dam yecholim la'amod lefanav. How much is it that when we're shown? Try to imagine, right? I imagine that 100 years ago, 50 years ago, it would be very hard to imagine what I'm about to tell you. That your whole life is going to be shown to you on a video. This is what you did. You could not stand there and deny it. You can't say, "Excuse me, I wasn't there," right? That wasn't me. We're talking about a HaKadosh Baruch Hu showing you your life on video. Yeah. What can you say? What can you say? Now today, because of such a thing called a video, a recorder, right? We can imagine that it's a very real possibility. But guess what? This is what Chazal taught us thousands of years ago already. That when you go to before the judgment, there's going to be these angels that you created yourself. The fact that you did a certain action, whether it's a positive action, you created good angels, defending angels, or whether, God forbid, you did a negative action, which created, we'll call them demons or negative angels, prosecuting angels. The very fact that they exist, they didn't just poof out of nowhere. You created them, and they're your either defending agents or either the prosecuting agents. They don't even have to open their mouths. The fact that they exist, they're standing in the courtroom. That tells the whole story, and your whole story is shown to you. This is what we've already been told. And how are you going to react? Probably with busha. That shame that you feel, believe it or not, is a great part of the tikkun process. That's part of what we call Gehenna, right? The day of judgment, experiencing the shame that God forbid, that we created for ourselves. That shame should be taken into account in a big way towards the atonement. Okay, so let's go on. All we did was read the first paragraph, first line in that paragraph. As it said in Bereshit Rabbah, Shemi b'holazu yukach limud al yom edin, that the shock that the brothers were in when Yosef revealed himself, and of course said, I'm, afterwards, the second verse, I'm your brother you sold to Egypt, that they had nothing to respond. Actually, in the first verse, right, in verse 4, they couldn't even respond. And we should understand, we should take as a lesson on this great day of judgment for ourselves, like Rabbi Eliezer said, Voy lana miyom edin, voy lana miyom tochecha, woe is to us on the day of judgment, and woe is to us on the day of rebuke. Uma Yosef kishamar lo achiv, what did Yosef do when he said to his brothers, Ani Yosef, lo yachlu lano, so they were not able to answer him or respond at all. Kishakadosh Baruch Hu oy mebedin, when God stands in judgment, alachas kama v'kama, how much more so? Now, as proof text, just a few ideas that the Kli Yakar brings down, is in Isaiah chapter 10, verse 3. It says, and what will you do for the day of visitation? In Hebrew, Umat ta'asu liyom pikuda, the day of, when I say visitation, we're talking about an intimate encounter with Hashem. This is, look at Rashi says, for the day of visitation, when the Holy One, blessed be He, visits upon you your iniquities. This is called the day of judgment. Ki ha'achim savru, as the Kliyakar continues, what were the brothers thinking? She Yosef, his kiravonam, that Yosef was reminding them of their sin. B'derech shenit ba'er, as we're about to explain. What will a man do on such a day of judgment? Ki yapaked moshavo umaso matano. He will be judged regarding everything, all of his thoughts, all of his actions, when he was sitting, when he was doing business. As it says in Job 37:7, by the hand of every man he seals, sealing like as a chatimah. Look at the Hebrew. Ki biyad kol adam yachton. What we do, our deeds, seal our fate. Okay? That's what I'm talking about, man. Okay? By the hand of every man he seals. So that every man should know his deeds. I still hold we should produce bumper stickers that say, all deeds matter. Right? I know I talked about this years ago, and apparently maybe it would still sell. And people wouldn't ruin your car because of the statement, all deeds matter. But anyway, let's go on. There's another verse he wants us to see, and that you can find in Jeremiah chapter 2, verse 23. And the verse says, Re'id darkech, go see your way. I'm just the highlighted part. And know what you have done. Ma'asit. You have to know what you did. So this is all according to what we talked about, Rabbi Eliezer in the Medrash. Shilakach kosvu lanu Torah. This is exactly the reason the Torah writes us that she'achiv nifhalu, that the brothers were in shock. Kedei shehamaskil, so that the person who is spiritually awake, like that word, awoke, who's someone who's woke, someone who is spiritually, intelligently awake, yiten alibo cherdas yom adin, will place upon his heart, will pay attention to that future day, that awful, dreaded day of personal judgment. Lilmod kal v'chomer me'achei Yosef. In order to learn a kal v'chomer, it's one of the 13 hermeneutical principles. As I like to say, exegesis. Exegesis. So this is one of the 13 hermeneutical principles of a kal v'chomer. Means if this is true, how much more that must be true. So if it's true by Yosef, by the brothers, how much it must be true by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay, now we're approaching the next verse. Goshu no Elai VaYigashu. So you'll find this, this is Genesis 15 verse 4. See, Yosef then said to his brothers, please come closer to me, and they drew closer. What in the world is he asking them to draw closer for? So first of all, we already discussed the idea that they were in shock and embarrassed, and they must have been inching away, right? Isn't that the natural instinct? So you would inch away. So he's actually trying to calm them down and bring them closer. Now what does he say? Come close, and they did. But the Kliyakar says, and remember, he's not making anything up. He never does. It's always from Chazal, and you'll see it in Rashi shortly. Heralem shumahu. He actually wanted them to come close to show them that he was circumcised. I know this sounds very strange, but we already discussed the idea that when you took an oath, right, even today, you will put your hand on a Bible. Right, we already saw a few times where the fathers asked someone to come close, Avraham with Eliezer. Right, we saw other times that to put your hand on the Bible, they didn't have the Bible. To put your hand on my thigh, right, next to the circumcision, as if that is a holy object. Not as if, but it is. Okay, so he wanted to show them that he was circumcised. Why in the world? What in the world would he want and gain by showing them that he was circumcised? Ratzobezeh, you know what he wanted? The Kliyakar is going to tell us. He wanted to laharos tzidkato. He wanted to show them how righteous he was. Why should that prove that you're righteous? What he was telling them was a message that I didn't fool around with all these harlots and prostitutes and known, what's known to be in Egypt, the looseness, the perversity, right? I wasn't engaged, sexually with a non-Jewish woman. Okay. That he was telling them that I'm here in Egypt, a place that is so disgusting and polluted with sexual immorality, and yet I did not involve myself. I kept myself righteous. I don't want to go too much into this Gemara, but in Maseches Eruvin, it says, Ki habo el ramis mishka arlate. Basically, it's like this, that in the future, when we all get judged, Abraham is going to come and save us from Gehenna, right? Because we're his children, and he's a great defender. But one of the ideas is that if, God forbid, a Jewish man was intimate with a non-Jewish woman, that Abraham would not save that person. Now, this is without tshuva. Of course, there's always tshuva. Many bali tshuva exist in this world. However, this idea of somehow that the orla, the foreskin, would somehow be covered over, meaning cover over the rest of the member, that you couldn't tell the person was circumcised, and this would be a physical. Remember, we're talking about a metaphysical world, so it's really hard to imagine what's going on, but that somehow Abraham would miss it because the person would look uncircumcised. And if it looks uncircumcised, then it would not be someone that he would pull out of Gehenna. Anyway, let's go on. Mitzina. What do we find out? What comes out from this? This is going to be the main message, and this is what Yosef is teaching the children of Israel, and he is giving them a lesson, okay? Not about the future redemption. You want to get out of Egypt? I'm telling you, these 4 things. Make sure to do these 4 things. And I think it's all relevant in our lives as well. Shaloshinoi es shmam. The Jewish people, after 210 years, right? We did not change our names. The Jews left Egypt with the same names they came down. Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, on and on. The same names we went down with, we came up with. We didn't change our names. Shaloshino es Shonam. And they didn't change the language. It's very interesting because the Kliyakar wants to say that both, hand in hand, you couldn't have one without the other. Because the whole idea that the names themselves have meaning. And the meaning has to do with Geula. So I'll give you an example. So like Reuven, so it says, what verse? In Exodus chapter 3 verse 7, it says that I have surely seen the affliction of my people. Hashem redeemed us because of this. The word in Hebrew is, right, Reuven. The idea is, I don't have the Hebrew in front of me to go through all the verses, so I'm just going to go through them in English. But so Reuven has to do with Re'u, having seen. So God actually redeemed us because he himself saw, and this name that was given to Reuven was already, it was, first of all, it's a Jewish name, and it has meaning, that Hashem would redeem us because he would see the affliction of his people. It says in Exodus chapter 2, verse 24, and God heard their groaning. God was interested in, because the Jewish people were groaning, so God heard, and that's where Shimon is related to Shema, to hearing. And Levi, in Zechariah chapter 2, verse 15, many nations will join themselves to the Lord on that day. It's talking about a future redemption idea, and the Hebrew obviously is related to the word Levi. Yehuda is in Isaiah chapter 12 verse 1, right? It's in Isaiah 12:1. So it's about Yehuda. You will say on that day, I will thank you, O Lord, for you were angry with me, but now your wrath has subsided and you comforted me. Again, future redemption, even Yehuda. So the truth is, this is in Yilchat Shemoni, Parsha Shmos, and you can go through all 12 names and how they all relate. So they kept not only their name, but also their language. In other words, they go hand in hand. The third thing, Lo Yubehem Ba'alei Lashon Hara. They did not speak derogatory about each other, right? This is an important lesson that we need to learn, but this is one of the reasons that they were redeemed. Now I want to mention, We're going to talk about this specifically, how Yosef got this message across. But also, there's another shot, and the Kliyakar explains that the very fact that a year before they were redeemed, meaning 11 months before they were redeemed, when the first of the plague started, okay, they already knew they were going to leave with a great wealth, and they didn't tell the Egyptians. And so later on in the 9th plague, when they actually seek out and know where all the stuff's hidden, the 9th plague is the plague of darkness, when they're able to walk around for 3 days and see where everything was hidden, so that on the night of the 10th plague, when they're about to leave, they can go and take the stuff from the Egyptians, because each one was asked to go and ask from their neighbors for their riches. That if just imagine if one Jew would have revealed to the non-Jews, I don't know, within the next year, we're leaving with all your stuff, they might have hid it better, or they wouldn't have been able to find it on the night of, or the 3 days of darkness, right? They would have maybe hid it out of town. Who knows what? But this is also an idea that they didn't speak Lashon Hara, meaning they weren't malshadim, they weren't traitors, they weren't turning in Jews, or they weren't revealing to the Gentile authorities what the truth was. And the fourth thing is Hayu Gedurim Me'arayos, and that was what we already basically covered, that they were not involved sexually with the non-Jews or perverse with each other. V'tamar shel davar yitber Parsha Shmos, and he explains the reason over there in Exodus, which we already kind of talked about in the Yokut Shemoni, Bezrat Hashem Yisbrach, Kamo Kain Kan. So too here. Shalach Yosef Acher Aviv V'achav. He sought after them. He wanted to bring them down. Very nice. Hodi lehem, and once they came down, he informed them Be'ez Zchut Yalu Misham. In what merit you will end up leaving from here. If you do this and keep these ideas, you will merit to eventually go out and back to Eretz Israel, to Eretz Canaan. V'ramzulem arba elu, and he actually hinted in the verses. We're going to see how he hinted to them within these verses of these 4 traits. Shri Yosef Shalem Bekulam. Now Yosef was perfect in all of them. And he said, right, Shaloshinu Shmo, how do we know not changing your name is very important? What's the very first thing he says? Ani Yosef. I am Yosef. Who's Yosef? The same Yosef that you sold? I'm still that same Yosef. By Hebrew, call me my name. Shalom Ani Yosef. Alpha Pisha Paro Kara Shmi. You know that Paro changed his name. Where do we see that? We see that in Genesis 41:45. Pharaoh named Yosef, right? I just have to say it in Hebrew because it's hard to read the transliteration. Tzafnat Pa'aneach. Okay, that's what the name Pharaoh gave to Yosef, but Yosef didn't go by that name. He went by Pharaoh. He went by Yosef. Mekom ani Yosef zeshmi le'olam. That's always going to be my name. V'shelo shinu l'shono, and they didn't change their language. We see a few examples, but the first thing is in verse 12, chapter 45, verse 12, when he's speaking to Binyamin. And behold, your eyes see, as well as the eyes of my brother Binyamin, that is my mouth that is speaking to you. As it says in Hebrew, do I have this right? Ki pi hamedaber alehem. It's my mouth that's speaking to you. My mouth is speaking to you in Hebrew. Lashon HaKodesh, I should say. And what else? They weren't parutz ba'arayos. They weren't breaking through the fence. Meaning they didn't break down in terms of sexual immorality. As it says, Gashu Elai, as we said, when he says, come close to me, and he showed him that he was circumcised, Herolem Shumahu. Now what about the Lashon Hara part? How do we know? What message, how do we know that Yosef was telling them, don't speak Lashon Hara? Because you know what he did? He said, Gashu Elai, come close to me, Gashu Elai. He didn't want that Binyamin, his brother, would hear about his sale. You know, Binyamin was not involved in the sale. Only 10 of the brothers were involved in the sale. Binyamin was not. That's why he said, come close to me. By doing that, he was hinting to them, this is going to help you be redeemed in the future. Even his father, nothing was told to. meaning Yaakov. Now, if it would have been revealed to Yaakov, Ki'ilu haya megala lo, vadai haya mitzava lo koidem ma'amoso. Now this is very confusing because there's a verse, if I'm not mistaken, look in Genesis chapter 50, verse 17. This is what the brothers are saying that Yaakov said. In other words, it's a narrative. They're basically saying, before father died, this is what he said. So you shall say to Yosef, please forgive now your brothers' transgressions and their sin, for they did evil to you. Now forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father. Now Yosef wept when they spoke to him. But Rashi tells us that, look at the bottom, your father commanded, they altered the facts for the sake of peace. And Yaakov gave no such command, since he did not suspect Yosef. So the brothers made that up. When they said, Dad, by the way, Dad said, after he died, right? Dad said before he died that you should forgive us for the sale. So we know that he didn't. But if he would have, so Ramaz lem Yosef, basically, Yosef was hinting, V'ramaz lehem Yosef, Yosef was hinting to them, Ki abavona machira yishalmu shtarchov, that basically, ultimately, this was for our benefit. Because in the Brit, Bein Batarim, that would be in Genesis chapter 15, 13, where God says that Ager Yezerecha, that your seed will be strangers for 400 years, that basically on account of the sin of the sale, that increased, that pushed forward, that didn't hold back the 400 years. Can you just imagine if everything was fine, because Yaakov was looking for shalva, and that would have been a bad thing. And Hashem created the sale that would make Yaakov not have peace and comfort. He was troubled for those 22 years, that, God forbid, we would have been in Egypt an additional 22 years because that 400 years would have been put on hold. I hope you're following me. There was an obligation of paying up the 400 years of being wanderers, not settling down. And yet Yaakov sought to settle down, and the Rag Zusha Yosef jumped upon him, as we spoke about in the past. This sale of Yosef, meaning, it's quite complicated to explain in such a short period of time, but this sin of the selling of Yosef actually moved forward and didn't hold back those 400 years that we just spoke about in the Brit Bein Batarim in chapter 50, verse 17. That is it's in chapter 15, verse 13. As it also says, Kamosh Ne'emar, V'oto al te'atzvu. He also said to them in chapter 44, verse 5, now don't be sad. Don't, how do we see this here? He said to them, and let it not trouble you that you sold me here. Right? The atah, right now, al te'atzvu. Now the Hebrew says. So, dafka atah, right now you shouldn't trouble you. Aval la'osid, but in the future, te'atzvu. You should be troubled, and it will trouble you. Al-kin rozlim agama gu'ula. Here and there, right in the moment, he was hinting to them about the future redemption. V'davarim ha'misava b'magula. All these things that I'm telling you now is going to cause your redemption. Right? What do we have? Not changing the name, not changing the language. What else do we have? Not speaking bad against your brother, and not involving yourself in sexual immorality. The Yeshorim, some also say the word ota, now it shouldn't bother you. Remez lasar harugi malchus. We have, as we know, on Yom Kippur, and we hint to it certainly on Tisha B'Av, about the 10 holy martyrs, okay, that they all realized, they didn't all live at the same time, but they all realized that there's something very, let's say from heaven, like a message from heaven, and they wanted to know whether they should fight and hide like some of the people in the past, like Shimon Bar Yochai went to a cave, right? If the evil government comes against you, you have to know, is it time to fight or to submit? So they were all sentenced at some point, and they want to know, you can break out of jail, you could call favors from the government. What should we do? And a message came from heaven, basically, that this is a atonement. This is going to serve towards the betterment of the Jewish people because of the sale of Yosef. There were 10 holy martyrs. They were reincarnated from the 10 brothers in order to serve partly as an atonement for what had taken place.
Who is the 10 martyrs?
Here, it's on the page 20. It's on the back, so page 6, number 25. We have a list here if you want to know. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, Rabbi Ishmael ben Elisha Kohen, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Hanani ben Turdion, Rabbi Chutzpit, the interpreter, Rabbi Lezer ben Shemua, Rabbi Hananiah ben Hakanya, Rabbi Yeshivev, the scribe, Rabbi Yehuda ben Dama, and Rabbi Yehuda ben Baba, since you asked. I don't know if I would have remembered them all, but I have it written down. Just to keep an idea, they all lived during the Mishnaic period, and they were all martyred by the Roman Empire shortly after the destruction of the temple. You can find this in Midrash, Ele Eskara, and anyway, so I want to just end off with one other idea, and that is about the story of who Yosef's wife was, who is the mother of Menashe and Ephraim. So we know her name is Osnat, and we know she's the daughter of Potiphar, the clergyman, what do you call it, the Kohen of On, right? Very mystical, perhaps idol-worshipping pagan. All right, so how can that be? How can all this come about? So either, there's two ways the Chazal bring it down. Either she was a convert, and this is a great thing, okay? And many of our greatest mothers, so many, Ruth, I mean, go through it, you know, so many of our greatest heroines are converts themselves. That's one idea, that she was a convert, because how could Yosef, who's claiming, I didn't mess around with non-Jewish women, marry Osnat, who was obviously what? Obviously an Egyptian. Well, guess what? Not necessarily so. So that's one idea. The other idea is that no, remember when Dinah was raped by Shechem? Well, she got pregnant. And this daughter is Osnat. Okay? And Yaakov was afraid for her life because Shimon and Levi, they already killed out Shechem. Maybe they're going to kill this young baby and not give it a chance. So he sent her all the way to Egypt. And, okay, it's a lot of details of the story. I'm not going to go into it. Let me just finish, okay? So, on a certain hand, Yosef, who is unbelievable. Can you imagine the shidduch that's made? Yaakov, according to this opinion, that Yaakov sent her down, he put a gold plate on her neck, necklace, and it told the whole story. And it was... And even the people that found her, Potiphar, perhaps this is what caused them to do tshuva, that this child, they couldn't have a child. And this child was given to them, and it came from the great people. They recognized this. It came from the land of Canaan, from the children of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, right? And who else, when they realize who Yosef is, meaning he's also a Hebrew from the same family, and it's actually, now we understand, it's his niece. He marries his niece, which is not a problem, okay? And it's just like, it's an unbelievable story, because how does Yosef see himself as everything is in the hand of God? All the events that come about, even those most negative events, are ultimately for the good. Even if we can just only imagine, which is really hard to do, that such a horrible experience, such as a rape, and an unwanted pregnancy, and all that came down, and ends up being, okay, there's also another whole story, and that is with Yosef and Dinah themselves. That who gave birth to Dinah? Leah. Who gave birth to Yosef? Rachel. So the Gemara tells us, the tradition is, that, believe it or not, Leah found out she was going to have a boy, and her sister was going to have a girl. Well, what did I just say? So she prayed, and there was I don't know what the word is, a transference of actual fetuses. And what happened after she prayed? That she got Dinah, Leah got Dinah, and gave birth to Dinah, and Yosef was born to Rachel. On another level, they were actually twins. Every one of the 12 tribes was born with a twin, who they married. Yosef was not with a twin. There was a separation. There was however this came about. That Leah gave birth to Dinah, that Rachel gave birth to Yosef with no twin. Ultimately, everything transpired, he ends up marrying the daughter of his twin. So I hope I didn't lose anybody in that. I beg you to do your own study, but what we do see and we should have faith and emunah, right? That if we do what God told us to do, right, by keeping these things, ultimately this will bring about the true redemption. So B'ezrat Hashem, we'll all learn our lessons. We'll be redeemed very soon. We'll see the incoming of the exile, the gathering of the exiles, as we'll see in the Haftorah. Yecheskel is talking about the two sticks, one with name of Yehuda, the other name of Yosef, and it's all going to come together, Ephraim, and it's all going to come together, and we'll have the ingathering of the exiles, the rebuilding of the temple, the coming of Mashiach, whatever order comes in, I'm happy with. Right? I didn't say it in the right order, it doesn't matter. B'ezrat Hashem, will all come about in our lifetime. B'mher v'meinu, and I wish everyone a Shabbat Shalom and a meaningful fast on the 10th of Teves.
Shamash